So I spent the day today reading Heidegger's essay on the origin of the work of art, which is probably one of his three most important essays. In addition to the question concerning technology and on the essence of truth, those are probably his three most important works after the big thick book that he wrote in 1927, Being and Time. Um, and they all interrelate. They all deal with the theory of truth as aletheia and the implications of that for art on the one hand and for science on the other. And so one of the reasons why I want to go over his essay on the origin of the work of art is because it's essential to understand. In our previous talk about Heidegger, we understood how Heidegger sees science as a culturally destructive force, as something that de-worlds the world, and through the process of enframing with technology, breaks nature up and extracts its resources to store them up so that they'll be available on demand. Um, it's an essentially destructive force. But for his theory of art, the artist is in many respects sort of his hero. He loved art. He was absolutely fascinated with the poetry of Hölderlin, and he also liked Rilke and Trockle and a number of other poets and artists and writers. And art was what fascinated him, and he saw it as the force that countered the destructiveness of science and technology. So he saw it as a salvific force, especially insofar as art deals with bringing forth the gods, as he says. Art brings the gods forth out of unconcealment, out of concealment into unconcealment. Art unconceals the gods, brings them forth. Especially important. This is especially important in a destitute time like today, in which the gods have fled into concealment. This is one of the basic phenomena that he sees as wrong with modernity. And so, one of the things that he says, there's another essay called The Age of the World Picture, in which he sort of outlines the main epochs of being as he sees them. In Being and Time, he had been concerned with analyzing the structure of modern man thrown into the world in a state of anxiety, with a life project in front of him, motivated by fear of death, to find an authentic life. That was the basic structure. But then he had what the academics call a turning, Dikera, after a certain point in the 1930s, when he began to become more and more interested in the fact that being is not always understood in the same way in different historical epochs. So from epoch to epoch, it shifts its understanding. And you're not going to find, though, in Heidegger any kind of understanding, let's say, of the Egyptian understanding of being, or the Indian or Chinese understanding of being, the way you find in Spengler. Heidegger was very Eurocentric, and to a certain degree, one could say that he remained stuck in an ancient medieval modern schema. But on the other hand, sticking with the evolution of the West enabled him to focus on it in a very intense way. And we could see how how the understanding of being shifts from epoch to epoch, starting with the pre-Socratic understanding of being as phusis. For the pre-Socratics, in this essay on the Age of the World Picture, he describes it this way. For the pre-Socratics, objects and entities rose up and opened themselves to humans, and humans sort of pondered them in awe and wonder. The pre-Socratic philosophers like Parmenides and Thales and Anaxagoras and Anaximander, and the world was a manifestation of wonder. Being was immanent in the world still, and the main aspect of that was that he gives a certain degree of autonomy to the objects themselves, and the subject wasn't important. Then he says that with Plato and Aristotle along came the divorce of being from becoming, and being became identified with the transcendent realm and was favored by the intellect, and the senses were fallen. So that the way things appeared was no longer a source of wonder and fascination, but it was the quest to find the intelligible forms as made manifest by mathematics. And then so when we get to the medieval understanding of being, the medieval understanding of being understands being as God is on top, and you have a great chain of being, and every being that is in the world is intelligible insofar as he occupies one slot along this chain of beings. Then he says, long about the time of Descartes, being shifted, and he says this is when the age of the world picture began. Now, by world picture, he does not mean, as I initially thought when I read the essay, that by world picture it just means a culture's generic cosmology, the way it pictures the cosmos. But that isn't what he means at all. It took me a little while to understand this. I had to go back and reread the essay a couple of times. What he actually means by world picture is that the West, during the period starting in the 17th century with Descartes and Newton and others, created this image of objects and beings as framed by a sort of world picture in which they exist as measurable magnitudes capable of objectivation, and the subject in that case is capable of determining the qualities of the object as, you know, measurable entities that exist within this sort of abstract phase space. And so it's the subject that becomes more important there in determining and becoming the sort of dominating force over the realm of objects. So in a peculiar sort of paradoxical way, the objectivity of Western science emerges as the result of the human subject. The subjectivity creates this scientific objectivity. And so this is a new understanding of being. This is what he means by world picture that takes place. And it's somewhat analogous, if you think of it in your mind, to what happened with the invention of depth perspective in painting at this time, in which three-dimensional space comes into view and objects are spread out in this objective three-dimensional space that is constituted by one single subject. You take one person's point of view, and that point of view constitutes the essence of all the objects within that space. And so that's basically what he means by the idea of the advent of the world picture. And this is what leads to the scientific domination. This is what leads not only to the scientific domination of phenomena, of objects, but also the birth and rise of humanism, in the sense that the human being is the center of the world, and this eventually, he says, leads to the present age of gigantism in technology, where distances disappear as the result of airplanes and radios and broadcasts. This sort of age of technological gigantism comes out of this humanistic idea that it's the subject who determines how objects will be. So that there's this, you can see this sort of subject, you know, it comes right out of this understanding of God, the maker, and also out of Plato's idea of the divorce of being from becoming in this abstract world of intelligibility and mathematical phase spaces that then dictate to objects how they're going to be. The old Greek understanding was that it was the objects that were the source of autonomy and wonder that presented to the interested human subject the essential nature of being. So it's a very different idea. And in between you have God as, you know, the ultimate ground of understanding during the Middle Ages for being. So the Greeks emphasized the object, Middle Ages emphasized God as the ultimate guarantor of the understanding of being, and then this age of the world picture from Descartes on gives priority to the subject. And this is what the humanistic tradition that Heidegger essentially saw himself as countering, especially in his letter on humanism that he wrote later. So these are the different ages, the epochs of being that he became fascinated with studying. And so that sort of forms the background now for this essay on the origin of the work of art, because we can see that science, as he understands it since the period of the 17th century in Descartes, is largely a de-worlding force, a culturally destructive force that creates inauthentic worlds. And the artist is the one who comes in and creates worlds, as we'll see in this essay. So as the essay begins, he wants to know what a thing is. He first starts out by asking the question, what is a thing? Because when you look around at works of art, you know, whether they're novels on a shelf or pictures on a wall or Beethoven's quartets, they're lying around amongst other objects. So how is it, what he's going to want to get at is what is it that makes a work of art different from all these other things? And so he wants to know what the essence of a thing is. What is the thingness of a thing? And so when he looks back at the tradition, he says that the traditional cliches, the cliched understandings are that a thing is a substance with attributes, these accidental properties that inhere in the substance. That's one understanding. And this is mirrored in our logical understanding of subject and predicate. The predicate inheres in the subject. This is one mode of understanding of what things are. But he says there is another mode in which things are thought to be bundles of perceptions that act upon us. This is the sort of empirical philosophy of sensation. Things are bundles of sensations. But then he gets to this idea that The main cliche, the main problematic aspect of thingness is this form and matter dichotomy. Things are formed matters. But he says that when we look at equipment, for example, by equipment he means tools, things that are made by human beings. It's really this paradigm of form and matter that that we tend to ascribe to things as well as equipment, as well as works of art. We tend to see all discussions of aesthetics tend to see works of art as form and matter, the matter out of which a work of art is made, and the formal idea that organizes that material. He says that largely comes from equipment, though. It's equipment that is formed matter primarily, and we project that out onto things. Things he's defining as the Greeks defined physis in a certain sense, as things that are self-making, things that have made themselves, trees, boulders, mountains, so forth, things in that sense. So we have three different categories of things. We have equipment, and we have works of art. Equipment and works of art have been made by human beings. But a work of art is not just a thing, or as we're led to understand from this form-matter dichotomy. So he wants to shift us out of this cliched understanding, get rid of this form and matter dichotomy, and try to understand the idea anew. So what he does is he says, let's take a piece of equipment and look at it. And let's take a simple, basic piece of equipment like a pair of peasant's shoes. And then he says, let's refer to it in the guise of, in the representation of Van Gogh's painting of a pair of shoes. So we see this pair of shoes. It's a peasant's pair of shoes. And what do we see there? And then he says, in the Van Gogh painting, when we look at it, we see the pair of shoes. We can sort of see the world that encompasses these pair of shoes as a kind of halo, a kind of aura, in which the peasant goes out into the fields. The shoes have been in contact, the soles have been in contact with the earth, and with the peasant woman that has been walking in them has been in contact with a very gritty world of soil and earth and rows of planted corn. And it's a world of earth. It's a world that's embedded and immersed in earth. But it is a world, and it constitutes the peasant woman's world. So we have this opposition of earth and world represented in this painting, and that we're going to see that what Heidegger is going to say is that the essence of works of art is twofold. One is that it sets truth to work in motion. It's the setting forth of truth. But how it sets forth truth is that it reveals the being of beings. Okay, it reveals, now being is that which enables something within a cultural phase space to come into intelligibility. So that's what he means by being. Now works of art are truth events, he's going to say, because they make things intelligible. They reveal the being of beings. And in this painting, Van Gogh reveals to us that the being of the shoes is essentially their reliability, and the fact that they disappear when the woman puts on the shoes. She's walking into the field. They disappear. The less she thinks about them, the less she's aware of them. They disappear into their usefulness. This gets back to his idea in Being in Time, that a tool in the mode of Zuhandenheit is in the mode of being used, and you don't notice it until it breaks. When it breaks, it falls into the theoretical mode as a problem. You have to think about it, and it becomes Vorhandenheit. But equipment disappears, as it were, into its usefulness and reliability insofar as it's inconspicuous and blends and merges into the background. So that's the being of this being, this pair of shoes, that this painting makes manifest for us. And so this is the basic image that he's going to see, that what the work of art does is it's a truth event. And so insofar as it is a truth event, it does something interesting. He's going to say that one of the things that makes equipment, that gives it its equipmental character, that makes it different from a work of art, is that the matter, the earthly matter of which equipment is made, actually disappears into the equipment. It's used up in it. A man making an axe takes the stone, if he wants to make a stone axe head, and it disappears into the usefulness of the implement. So it disappears, it's used up. But in a work of art, the earthly elements, the color in a painting, the tones in music, the stone in a work of sculpture, the earthly element is not used up, but it's actually it's not used up, but it's actually incorporated into the work of art.